Welcome, welcome. It is Thursday, July the 16th. This is Hurricane Hub Live. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandages. Let's get right to it. The Atlantic, we're tracking two areas of interest right now, both of which have very low chances of developing. In fact, there's been no change in the potential of them developing. Their probabilities have stayed the same 24 hours ago. Out in the eastern Pacific, though, Elida getting stronger on its way to becoming the first hurricane in the basin this season. Fifth named storm of the season, and that's likely going to be a very active rest of the season in the eastern Pacific. Starting things off in the Atlantic basin, nothing going on here right now. Our two areas that we're watching, this one here that came off the coast of Africa as an African easterly wave, was looking pretty decent yesterday, but it is building into a very stable environment, an unfavorable area for development here. Lots of sinking motion. There's also still lots of Saharan dust there. So this is unlikely to develop here, only a 10% chance of that developing. Now over towards the southeast coast of the United States, northeast Gulf, there's not even an area of low pressure here developed yet, but there's the possibility of one forming here over the next week. And this one's got a slightly better shot, still considered low at 20% chance of developing here. In fact, here's the numbers on it. 0% chance in the next 48 hours, and then a 20% chance over the next 7 days. And then this one here off the coast of Africa, 10% chance both within the short term and long term. And again, just kind of void of any convection like we saw yesterday. So big changes there. All right, the Atlantic storm names that are up. Bertha is up next. We had Arthur now 3.5 weeks ago. Almost 4 weeks ago, actually. 4 weeks ago to the date, actually. 12 hours, it was around 4. Came and went. Bertha next, Cristobal, Dolly, Edouard, Faye, and Gonzalo. Doesn't look like we'll be getting those anytime soon. Now, July overall, 8% of all named storms developed during the month. Then it really shoots up in August. Typically mid-August, it really starts to activate. Over a quarter of all named storms, over a third in September, and 17% October. November is the least active by percentage of named storms, only 5% developing that month. Still plenty of dust out there, very stable air, very dry air in the mid-levels, stretching from the Gulf through the Caribbean and over through the main development region. However, some changes here. Notice these plumes are ejecting off the coast at a higher latitude. It's going to start opening up the main development region here. We're going to start to see that become a little bit more unstable. And if we get favorable conditions, there could be some of these African easterly wave seeds that enter the Atlantic that could go on to at least start to develop here. Not like the one we're seeing out there now that's pretty much poof gone in just a short amount of time. Plenty of warm water out there as well. These are anomalies compared to normal. Lots of warm water in the subtropics. Even the main development region starting to see some very warm sea surface temperatures there. You need 78, 79 degree water temperatures for the latent heat exchange between the surface of the water and the developing storm systems there. And you certainly have that basin-wide from the Caribbean all the way up into the Gulf, too. But then look at the eastern Pacific. Just very, very warm. Here is our El Nino signature here that just continues to grow in strength off the coast of South America, the equatorial Pacific waters, and then north of there, just an abundance of warm water for more and more storms to get going. And I'll show you the Pacific here coming up right after a quick break. Welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. The Eastern Pacific is much more active. We've got Elida here, a tropical storm. One area of interest behind it, that's likely going to be tagged as an invest pretty soon, moving pretty much in the wake of Elida. And then behind that, another area of low pressure potentially that's got a low chance of developing now. Farther off to the west, again, this is southwest of Hawaii. We've got another area here that's got a low chance of developing here. 30% odds. This is Invest 91C. The C on it means it's heading into the Central Pacific, so heading out of the Eastern Pacific Basin there, so it won't get a name from the East Pac list. And then we've got this one right behind Elida that'll likely become Fausto. In the short term, it's only a 20%, but 7 days, 90% chance, highly likely. I would say we watch that carefully because if it's moving into the wake of Elida, we've got the chop of the ocean. It's mixed up some slightly cooler waters, especially if it gets strong enough. So usually storms that come right behind another one, it can be 50-50. So we'll watch it, but you got 7 days pretty much to watch that develop. So Amanda, Boris, Christina, Douglas, and now Elida all checked off. All have been tropical storms so far, but Elida is forecast to become a hurricane, and it's well on its way. You can see here on satellite imagery that it looks very symmetrical, plenty of strong convection surrounding that entire center there, and right now winds are up to 65 miles per hour. Remember, yesterday they were up to 50, so an intensification has occurred. We're only about 10 miles per hour away from it becoming a Category 1 hurricane, and it is forecast to get there as we head into the weekend. In fact, as early as tomorrow afternoon, up to a Cat 1 80 mile per hour winds, and that looks to be where it maxes out. I wouldn't doubt if it overperforms here a little bit, but as it turns off to the north-northwest, it's going to gain latitude and eventually move into some cooler ocean waters. You saw those anomalies there. Most of that warm water was much farther to the south here. It's on like the northern fringe right now, Elida is, and it'll be moving out of it. So it moves into a more stable environment, cooler ocean waters, and it'll likely start to weaken there, and that's exactly what it's forecast to do. So right now, 5 named storms out in the Atlantic. Once that clocks a hurricane, we'll have a tick on there for the Eastern Pacific. Still, nothing looking likely to develop in the Atlantic anytime soon, so we stand at 1 with Arthur about a month ago. We'll see you right back after a quick break. Jess Whitehead joins us, and I want to get this right, Jess. You're the executive director of Old Dominion University's Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience. ICAR for short. We like our acronyms here.
We do love our acronyms.
And welcome to the show.
Meteorologists love some acronyms.
We do. Science in general, right? Loves the acronyms. So, Jess, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about what the Institute at ODU does. And for our viewers, ODU, Old Dominion, is located right here in Norfolk, Virginia.
Thank you for that. So the Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience is really unique in that we focus on the practice of building coastal resilience. So we partner with communities, with localities, organizations, businesses to engage, understand their needs, and then develop and deploy real solutions based on integrative, innovative, and applied research. So we really see ourselves in the university as a catalyst in the Hampton Roads region and for all of coastal Virginia to make sure that we have thriving communities no matter what Mother Nature throws at us.
Now, it seems like it's great placement for ICAR here in Hampton Roads. As we talked about before the show, it's one of the most susceptible coastal regions along the eastern seaboard. And explain to viewers why that is.
Absolutely. We are right at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And so we have historically for hundreds of years, and even going back to when the many tribes in Virginia were here, it has always been an important location. Right at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, extremely strategic. Today, we have the world's largest naval base. We have the Port of Virginia. We have 7 different cities in our region. We have 17 localities overall in the Hampton Roads Planning District region, and some of the most historic sites in the United States. We also have one of the highest rates of sea level rise in the United States and the highest rate on the East Coast. So that means that as we go forward into the future, floods that we may have seen in the past have the potential to be higher as the baseline sea level is increasing, as well as the vertical land motion from our land sinking on top of that. So we've got that 1-2 punch going on.
Really a double whammy with the subsidence out there. So I brought this up when we talked before the show. Is that a big contributing factor to the sinking of the land across Hampton Roads is that Chesapeake Bay meteor impact?
Yeah, we've got the meteor impact. We've also got water extraction going on for our industries here. So those two, again, kind of lead to that compaction. Right now, it's probably about 1/3 of our relative sea level rise. As we look forward into the future, you would begin to expect to see that global rate, kind of the relative rate that you see from things like ice melting that's currently locked up on land or changes in ocean circulation, becoming a larger component than the subsidence.
Now, I just want to clarify, because that meteor impact, you didn't miss it. That was 35 million years ago, so it was a long, long time ago.
Good.
But let's get into the flooding aspect of things here, Jess. How do institutions get into drawing the flood maps? You know, they're very intricate here in Hampton Roads, and it can be different from your neighbor just down the street from what your flood zone is. So what kind of goes into that? What do folks look at to draw those?
Yeah, so the Federal Emergency Management Agency is the entity that is really going through and approving these maps. And really what they're looking at is what we call H&H, hydrology and hydraulics. So the hydrology is what's the water. For us, a lot of that is the probabilities of certain storm surges, the addition of wave action that might do damage on top of that storm surge, and then the hydraulics of how that water moves through the landscape. So it's a really complicated engineering exercise. Interestingly, we now have private companies that are doing this more and more often and starting to get some different results by really taking modeling approaches to this and trying to get a handle on some factors that are harder for these engineering studies to capture, like really big rainfalls and what happens when you have one of those lower probability but high consequence kind of rainfalls interacting with things like our stormwater infrastructure. So that's really a cool science question of why do we still do science on this? The FEMA flood maps don't couple to the stormwater infrastructure, and we know that the cities have modified so that they are relieving flooding in some areas, and then things happen like leaves back up a storm drain and you might have flooding in a new area. So there's a whole lot of research going into how to do flood modeling better, but right now the real kind of jurisdictional process that holds sway with your mortgage company, which is what everybody at home cares about, is that FEMA process.
All right, very interesting. So, Jess, what are some proven tactics for mitigation of storm impacts from either a hurricane, a nor'easter here in Hampton Roads, or like what are some interesting ways that cities and municipalities are adapting to the rising sea level change and overall more impacts from storms?
So that is a really broad question, Tim. I think most people understand the concept of a seawall or a bulkhead. That's kind of traditionally, if we go back in history, how we handled that stuff. Let's stick up a big wall. Sometimes there are challenges in that, and sometimes that's the only thing you can do. If you are in a river channel and you have really big ships that go back and forth, a wall is your option. But sometimes if you're a homeowner, you may be living in an area where you want to put up a bulkhead on your property. When you get wave action in these storms, it'll start to scour in front of that and begin to erode the integrity of that wall and start to see that failure. So a lot of what we focus on in ICAR, and in particularly in our partnerships with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, is how do we use nature to work with us and help out in some of these circumstances. Sometimes, and in Virginia, it's actually, if you go into code, it's the preference. You have to prove, you use a living shoreline or prove that you can't use one. And those are more natural techniques that use vegetation, that use different kinds of materials that allow oysters to build up in certain areas. Those are things that aren't going to stop a 15-foot storm surge, but they definitely help with things like dampening down wave action. And in some cases, in places like North Carolina, where they've had recent big storms like Hurricane Florence in 2018, they've been able to find out that these living shorelines end up having less damage after a storm. But it's really dependent on where you live and the conditions of what you're trying to protect. So we work a lot with when can you use those natural and nature-based solutions primarily, and when do you have to use them in hybrid approaches so that your gray approaches, like you have to have a seawall, aren't doing as much damage to the natural environment and the habitat. And that's some of the coolest, most enjoyable work that we do, and it crosses all of the disciplines. We've got people who are, we have research faculty within ICAR who are working with ODU's Civil and Environmental Engineering Department to build a wave flume that will allow us to test different vegetation types and see how wave action gets dampened by different types of plants. But then we also have people in our biological sciences who are partnering with people in the School of Business. Right now, when you go and all of these cities are trying to put in more of these nature-based solutions, there's one nursery in New Jersey supplying the plants. So they're trying to figure out how do we work in Virginia to make this attractive business proposition and something that will work so that we can be growing those in Virginia. So there's all kinds of different ways that we're working. And the coolest thing about ICAR is being able to be that hub where all of these faculty from different departments can be working with people from the cities and collaborating with them to get things on the ground and make sure it's, data to decision.
Now, artificial intelligence is becoming more and more embedded in what I do with meteorology and weather forecasting and model prediction. I'm interested to hear how that's coming into play with maybe modeling storm scenarios for mitigation purposes or adaptation for coastal communities. How are you guys using it?
Yeah, so right now, we're really, I think, on the forefront of beginning to experiment with how AI can be a value add in these processes. You're absolutely right. A lot of it has been in the modeling arena, particularly in getting into flood modeling, developing better flood maps, doing those really difficult data-intensive things like coupling that stormwater infrastructure or determining how we layer up these solutions. I think a lot of the future is also going to be in helping planners make better decisions. When you are working for a locality and you're making a decision about a project, it's not just the science that comes into it, it's the planning, it's the zoning, it's the economics and the benefit cost. It's really hard right now to synthesize all of those different data points, really, and modeling into something that's useful. And I think that that's somewhere where AI can be of a benefit and something that will help planners be able to process a lot more information than they can currently when they're having to make these decisions.
Now, real quick, before I let you go,
Yeah.
What's the most overlooked preparedness in regard to hurricane preparedness measure that you think people just forget about?
Buy flood insurance. 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely no. And right now, there are no storms in the Atlantic, assuming that we don't see Arthur 2.0 out of some very, very tiny chance. But there's a 30-day waiting period when you purchase federal flood insurance. So now is the best time to price a policy. Your homeowner's insurance does not include flood. You've got to buy it separately.
Now, do you think it's necessary even if you're not in a flood zone?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, when we look nationally, it runs somewhere between 26 and 30% of flood damage is happening outside of these mapped flood zones. And it's because of all of these other factors that are harder to layer on together. We especially saw that in a lot of places in Hurricane Helene in Southwest Virginia, Western North Carolina, flooding outside of those mapped flood zones. So if you see water from your house, if it rains at your house, it can flood if you get enough of it. So buy that flood insurance. And if you're not inside X zone, or I'm sorry, if you're inside the X zone, that area that's outside of a mapped floodplain, you're going to get the best price. And in a lot of the Hampton Roads localities, they participate in the community rating system, which gets you anywhere with our localities between a 15 to a 25% discount on that rate.
Fascinating. All right, thank you so much, Jess Whitehead, Executive Director, ODU Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience. Really appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back. During hurricane season, it's crucial for us to know where and when a hurricane might hit. Thanks to the help of hurricane models, often called spaghetti plots, we get a pretty good idea of which path storms will take. But how exactly do they work? Meteorologist Evan Stewart explains.
Hurricane forecast maps with squiggly lines representing the various hurricane forecast models are ubiquitous during hurricane season, projecting where a tropical system might go. They represent a complex set of equations and algorithms that meteorologists have been using for decades, dating back to the 1950s. Today's models are far more complex, taking hours to run on some of the fastest supercomputers in the world. Data from satellites, aircraft, ships, buoys, and land-based sensors are fed into the model's mathematical equations to create a digital version of the atmosphere. Each model has a different purpose, so they use different sets of data and equations, resulting in different forecasts. Some models incorporate the date and location of past storms, while others focus only on a storm's strength or direction of movement. Ultimately, these models are restricted by available data and computing power, but they are all improving every year.
Now, as hurricane season continues, meteorologist Evan Stewart breaks down the formation of tropical systems and the impact of the eye wall.
Hurricanes are like giant heat engines in the atmosphere, using warm, unstable air as fuel. As the air is pulled into the hurricane, it spirals toward the center, getting faster and faster, eventually rising to create the giant cumulonimbus clouds that encircle the calm eye. This unbroken vertical wall of clouds is the eye wall. Now, the convergence of winds here is so strong that the air rises faster and with more force than anywhere else in a hurricane, producing intense rain and damaging winds. And in the strongest storms, this can translate to surface winds over 150 miles per hour.
For more information as hurricane season continues, visit the 13 News Now Hurricane Fast Facts playlist on YouTube. You can get to it by scanning the QR code on the right of your screen. There you can find information on supplies you should have on hand, emergency resources, storm facts, and a whole lot more. All right, it's time for tropical trivia. Last night's question was, what is the date considered to be the peak of the Atlantic season? That would be September the 10th. All right, tonight's question is, which satellite first allowed meteorologists to routinely monitor hurricanes from space? Was it GOES-1, TIROS-1, Landsat-1, or Aqua? I'll have the answer for you tomorrow night on HHL. Remember, we're here Monday through Friday every weeknight at 8 p.m. We'll see you here for Friday.